Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, it's a special edition where we talk to Noel Roby, who created the baseballstoryteller.com blog. He's a former baseball player and a fan of Dwight Gooden getting into the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. We talked to this noted blogger and baseball mind about the real possibility of Dwight Gooden getting into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame at Cooperstown one day. This podcaster here had the chance to meet my childhood hero and Dwight Gooden back in 2023 during a press conference at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri. And at the end of a Q&A session, I told Doc that I would be there in Cooperstown when he got inducted. At this point in our history, it's a long shot, but the impossible is always possible, much like Dwight Gooden having a stellar career against all the odds for a kid from Tampa, Florida. Thus, the dream is alive. Noel is a kindred Gooden spirit. We open the door to getting the proverbial dialogue moving forward to ensure that Dwight Gooden gets his day in the Cooperstown sun. This is the beginning of an adventure. Tune in to this monumental first step. Noel.
There he is. How you doing, Joe?
Hey, what's up, man?
Not much.
Well, hey, man, I just want to give everyone out there a little bit of context, and I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. Both of us, I think, I got to admit, I don't know that I've ever run into anybody in my life that has admired and had kind of this kinship for Dwight Gooden. So it is definitely an honor to speak with you. This has been kind of a lifelong passion for me.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that connects people. In terms of baseball. I mean, baseball is a connecting force that it could be somebody in California or, overseas or, Rhode Island, Florida. But I mean, baseball is a connecting rod that brings people together. And I think that's why I like sharing the stories that I do. So.
Well, that's wonderful. And I want to kind of get into your history with baseball after I kind of give a little intro into why we connected, which is another beauty of living in the 21st century, of having the internet at our disposal, having shared interests, and the ease of something like Zoom to connect and to do this. So I'm always grateful that we live in this era, because I grew up as a kid of the 80s. Obviously, Doc was, a big part of that baseball time period. It's so much easier to connect to fans no matter where you are in the world.
Yeah, and I think to further that too, I mean, like growing up, you and I, we would go get the morning paper, or we would subscribe to magazines, baseball magazines, and read stats. And now especially when I was writing the article on Dwight Gooden, I simply went to Baseball Reference and looked up his stats in mere seconds. I mean, so that's the beauty of living in the modern times of that instant gratification and information that's at your fingertips. So.
When Dwight Gooden was my favorite player in high school, I remember I used to want to get every article, every periodical, and that was in the days where there wasn't as much as there is now because of the internet. And I remember going through microfilm and all these things. So when I saw the pictures on your blog of old newspapers, I remember how I would go through my stomach and my mind getting dizzy through the microfiche.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like those magazines were everything to me. I mean, they were describing in full detail, what people do now on, their own websites and their own blog sites. But those magazines that used to come out, prior to spring training, I mean, those things were gold. I mean, you'd read through those and you'd say, wow, it looks like, I mean, I was a Red Sox fan growing up in Rhode Island. So, I mean, I'd look through that and say, well, let me see where they think they're going to land this year, or who they picked up, or whatever it may be. I mean, it was just like, you just craved that information if you were a sports fan of that era. And, I kept a lot of those magazines, and I refer to them from time and again for interesting articles. And, the one about Dwight Gooden, I don't know if you remember from the blog, it merely said, how good is Dwight Gooden? And, the answer is, to me, as we're talking today, he's Hall of Fame worthy.
And that's why we connected. And I agree. I used to have subscriptions to Sports Illustrated and the Sporting News, and I would read all the same articles, and I was following all the players, big baseball card guys. So I was looking at stats, and of course, Doc was like top of the list. But, I grew up in Liberty, Missouri, which is a suburb of Kansas City, and loved baseball since I was a kid. And Dwight Gooden just appealed to me. Of all the people that I could pick, I just gravitated to him, loved his windup, loved the way he delivered. He was a young phenom. I mean, he really took over New York. And that's the thing that I think is also kind of a part of this, is that he was this young guy that just kind of took over the Big Apple. And, I had the posters. In fact, I've tried to find that poster, the Nike poster with the smoke coming out of his ball. Have you seen that one?
I have not seen that for years, but it's probably somewhere up, in my kid's bedroom or somewhere, like rolled up somewhere in the closet or something. But I know that I had a Dwight Gooden poster next to my Nolan Ryan posters and Roger Clemens posters. I mean, I was a wannabe pitcher in high school. I didn't pitch for my high school team. I pitched in the summer for American Legion and Babe Ruth, and on these teams, I mean, I was either number 21 for Roger Clemens or number 16 for Dwight Gooden. So, I mean, those guys were the guys that I emulated. I didn't throw as hard as them, but I did develop a pretty decent curveball. So that I kind of patterned my pitching motion on those two guys, but they were special talents. And boy, whenever they were on television, I was just absolutely glued.
And those were the cards from a baseball card perspective that you wanted to get. They were rare, and they were great. They had great trading value. And for me, I loved baseball and tried to play in high school, but I was 4'11" most of the time, so I ran. I didn't do that, but I remember just there was just the comfort, and being a journalist now and being in podcasting and having a radio show. My first jaunt into journalism was writing a letter to the Kansas City Star about forgiving Dwight Gooden, about moving past the drug convictions and just holding on to second chances, and the fact that this guy had so much talent and he was genuinely a good guy, and that kind of mushroomed into me getting my first job in college. But the way I got kind of to this point where I'm thinking about really advocating for Dwight Gooden being in Cooperstown in the Hall of Fame was watching a 30 for 30 with my wife a few years ago about the '86 Mets. And we married in 2019, and there's things that she didn't know about me. And one of them was this love I had for Doc. And she got me an autograph jersey of his and his biography that following year, which I believe was at the end of 22 going into 23. So I read the biography, and I find out that he's coming to Kansas City to get inducted into the Hall of Game by Mr. Bob Kendrick at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. So I apply to get press credentials thinking, oh my God, I can't believe there's a possibility of me meeting my hero. And I end up getting there with my son. He's on the spectrum, and we just did this program called Challenger, and they take special needs kids and fly them around the city. And it was that morning, and there was a lot of traffic in Kansas City, and I literally got to the point where I was like, I don't know that I'm going to be able to pull this off. And my son gets really nervous about things, so I couldn't tell him about meeting Doc and that this was my hero. I just had to see if I could arrive. I do. I get my press passes, and all of a sudden, Bob Kendrick, who has quite a voice, comes around the corner after giving this whole group of Hall of Gamers a tour, and Dwight Gooden walks into the room, and it was like everything froze. He
Hmm.
comes up. He could have spoke to anybody in the room. He comes up to me. We shake hands and introduce each other. And I ended up getting in there and asking him a few questions, had a real engaging time, got a picture with my son. And I couldn't believe, everybody says don't meet your heroes, but Dwight Gooden was the antithesis of that. He was wonderful. He was warm, and it was just great. So the last thing I said to Doc is, the next time I see you, I want to see you at the ceremony in Cooperstown when you get in the Hall of Fame. And he just kind of looked at me like a little perplexed. But I really believe there's a chance it can happen. So the other day, I Googled that, Dwight Gooden Hall of Fame, and you were one of the first articles that came up. I love the article. I reached out, and I had to talk to you about it.
Yeah, and I think that the it's an interesting debate that comes up with baseball fans of all ages is, what's the criteria to get into the Hall of Fame? Obviously, the Baseball Writers Association of America is the one that votes the players in, and then you have the Veterans Committee that will vote guys in after their initial time is up if they haven't been inducted. But you start to think about players that get elected, and then you say to yourself, well, how would that player compare to, say, like Don Mattingly or Andy Pettit or let's in this case Dwight Gooden? And then there's your level of frustration as a fan because you say, well, geez, I don't want to take anything away from this player that got inducted or this particular group of writers in that 75 percentile that elected this particular player. But what were they thinking when they reviewed Dwight Gooden and his career and the enormous amount of data that's available through either Baseball Reference or certainly the New York Mets or any particular website that has statistics. Apart from what happened to him in his personal life, I mean, what were they thinking not electing this special talent? And so that's what kind of prompted me to write the article. And I wanted to present statistical information that would showcase Doc's ability versus a couple of guys that people consider to be the greatest all time. Sandy Koufax is one of them. Bob Feller's another one. Very similar statistics in terms of age, when they came up. Koufax had a little bit more of a troubled start to his career. I'd say the first 5 or 6 years were not as great as his last six. His last six are certainly legendary. But Feller, same thing, came up at 19 years old, from a small town in Iowa. Tampa Bay, Florida, where Doc Gooden grew up, that's not certainly a small town. But again, I mean, just for a 10-year period for the New York Mets, Dwight Gooden was absolutely phenomenal. And so I think that's what kind of made me excited about writing the article. And I stand by it 100%. And I'm willing to debate it with any person that's on the Baseball Writers Association of America committee that votes people in. And I'm happy to jump on board with your cause to get Dwight Gooden elected into Cooperstown.
So, this is the other thing that's interesting about Dwight Gooden, and you're statistically breaking down this career. By 31 years old, when you're a pitcher in the major leagues, you're on the back end of your career. You're way on the back end of your career. Your shelf life has gone away, especially for someone like Dwight Gooden, especially with his history of how good he was when he was young, the wear and tear you put on your body. But this man not only went to another team, but he went to a crosstown rival to the Yankees. And at 31 years old, while his dad, we didn't know this until after the fact, or maybe tangentially, was literally on his deathbed, he pitched a no-hitter for the Yankees. He was 31 on May 14th, 1996. Those things, those parts of him that were on the field, I mean, long after all these drug issues that happened, he redeemed himself in the most magnanimous way. Then last year at this time, his number was retired by the Mets. He's gotten all these accolades, him coming to Kansas City when I met him. So that's the thing that baffles me about this. Like, what is it in this institution of Cooperstown that can just categorically exclude people because of things that didn't happen on the field? I mean, it's the most harm that Dwight Gooden did was to himself.
Correct. And I think that is the lingering debate with fans because you don't necessarily get unless a writer is outspoken about why they didn't put somebody in or why they put somebody in. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out why Derek Jeter did not get 100% of the votes, but and I'm not even a Yankee fan. So, in terms of Dwight Gooden, it may have something to do with the last few years of his career. I will say one thing about pitchers as they get older. They have to transform themselves on the mound. Dwight Gooden was a power pitcher who had a power arm. He was an athletic player on the mound. He was actually a pretty decent hitter as well. Back then in the National League, they actually hit for themselves as opposed to, the current role, which they have a designated hitter. But, pitchers, when they get into their 30s, if they've already thrown maybe 10 or 11 years in the major leagues, a lot of innings, they have to pick up another pitch. They can't throw the ball by guys anymore. And Dwight Gooden did that. He picked up another pitch or two, and he became, let's face it, he became sort of a crafty right-handed guy. He wasn't a guy blowing guys away, but and you may have to look up the stats for his no-hitter, but I guarantee you didn't throw more than 10 strikeouts. So, he got guys out sort of like the old-fashioned way, which is pitching to contact and letting your defense do the rest of it. So, But kudos to him for. I just want to go back to what you were saying about you meeting him with Bob Kendrick. I mean, kudos to him for spending time with you and recognizing a moment, and then kudos to you for putting that out there about seeing him in Cooperstown. I think that probably meant a lot to him because I'm sure it's on his mind.
Yeah, and it should be. And that's the thing that I think really what it comes down to is that I know that I mean, things are different now with all this cancel culture stuff that's going on. And it's become kind of the specter of how we measure people. And I'm not saying that we need to ignore things if people are doing egregious things. But again, as I stated before, the fact that what he did directly influenced him himself. Like Pete Rose was doing something, I think that was a little bit different with the gambling that affected the players and everything. And I know Doc did kind of the same thing. But when you do something like alcohol and drugs, it's really, I mean, it'll radiate out to other people, but it's really you doing it to yourself. So it wasn't like he was trying to harm his teammates and doing things. And even in his biography, it was like the reliability of him getting to starts, even during rocky times, was totally there. And the things that he's doing now, like I follow him on social media, he's always getting out there and advocating, and he's around the kids, and he's promoting, and he's a family guy. He's putting pictures of his family up all the time. There's such a redemptive way that Doc is, and I hope that just putting this out, maybe getting a petition, that maybe this will change some minds for people to say, you know what, we don't need to have this institution like Cooperstown being so antiquitous. It can evolve, it can change. We can accept people in here, even if they've done something in their personal lives.
Well, and I think that's where, and that's where I kind of look to the Veterans Committee to sort of say, he was one of ours who, was an elite player for a long time. And again, that's how people always ask me all the time, like, could Ted Williams play in 2025? And my answer, more often than not, is I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, Ted Williams played in an era where men went off to war for a couple of years, and that was the norm. I don't know if his personality would have jived with 2025 with social media. I have no idea. All I know is that when he played, he was an elite player in that era. I mean, you could say the same thing about, Bob Gibson or, Lou Brock or anybody. I mean, you could pick any particular player from a different era, Babe Ruth, and if you put him in this era, would they dominate? Without question, without question. If Dwight Gooden if this was his first year in the major leagues, he would have a similar run now as he did back in the 1980s. I believe that 1,000% because of the type of pitcher he was and the type of competitor he was. He would have dominated the National League if he was coming up with the Mets now.
I remember watching a documentary on Nolan Ryan, and I was totally blown away that he never won a Cy Young. And the reason why this is spectacular, putting it next to Dwight Gooden, is that he's won the Cy Young, he won a World Series, he's amassed all these records, did it very early on in his life, and I believe that he stayed relatively consistent even when he wasn't younger and in his glory days, like I said, at 31 pitching a no hitter. So I think when you look at the breadth of his career, now the Yankees, I believe, did they win? I'm wondering if he won when he was with the Yankees. Did they win a World Series?
I'd have to look back and see that. I believe that it was 96 was his last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did win it. They did win a World Series. Yes.
So there you go. So he's won two World Series with crosstown rivals. So that is spectacular. So I think there's a part of me that wants to pay respects to this man that I've always admired, but I think more than that, being 52, being an older guy, getting out of just kind of that kid wonderment of having a favorite player, I think I've stepped more into this realistic light, so to speak, of understanding how this world works, seeing things from a more mature way, more wisdom. And I really just believe that Dwight Gooden embodies all of the things that would make sense for human beings that descend on Cooperstown to look at him in a hallowed hall of this game that we all love.
And I think you have a fantastic reference there in Bob Kendrick. I mean, if you reached out to Bob and said, I wanna, throw an idea by you and get your take on why you think Dwight Gooden is not in the Hall of Fame. That guy may be somebody who, you could kind of pile on with nationally because he's got such a great reputation and he's got such good insight on the game, both positive and negative. Obviously, he's seen the best and he's seen the worst.
Yeah.
So he might be a good reference for that kind of situation. And again, if there's anything that I could do to help the cause, I'm certainly going to jump in with both feet.
Well, and I think you just have. I think you being you responded immediately when I asked if we could talk. This is all so everybody understands. This is all transpired within a 24-hour window. I caught your blog. I was intrigued. I loved it. Loved what you wrote. Loved your idea. We spoke, and this all happened really quick. So I appreciate you. I think you've done quite a bit to just have this conversation, to put this out there. I'm looking forward to putting this out in the wind. Thank you for the reference for Bob, because that's a brilliant idea. I think that could maybe gain some really needed traction, but I just really feel like it's in my best interest as not only a fan, but just someone looking at humanity and someone that loves this game of baseball to say, I want future generations to never forget Dwight Gooden, because I think he brought more joy. One other thing I wanted to bring up real quick that I kind of got lost in, there's been a lot of thoughts because I'm just so excited to talk to a Dwight Gooden fan. Last year, I was with my son watching the playoffs, and there was a panel before a Mets game, and Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden were up there, and Big Poppy was up there, and there was a couple. Rodriguez was up there, and they were all totally bespeckled by sitting next to them. Like these are like modern legends in their own right, and they were totally freaked out by sitting next to them. And I think that and these examples of actual Hall of Famers that get bespeckled by these people, it was the shoulders of Doc and Daryl that these people like looked at and stood on to get to their place in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing that's interesting about, Strawberry and Gooden and their place is that New York City is not an easy place to play a professional sport.
Yeah.
There have been a myriad of players that have played in other locations that have gone to New York on big contracts and they have fallen literally on their face. Okay, you can go right down professional sports, whether it's hockey, basketball, football, certainly baseball. I mean, I used to cringe every single time I would read, Sports Illustrated or look in the Sporting News or USA Today and see that the Yankees signed some, huge hitter or some great right-handed pitcher or some reliever in a big free agent contract, and they were promising the world, and then that player all of a sudden couldn't hit the ball or couldn't find the strike zone. New York is not an easy place to play. And neither is Boston, and I'm not saying Chicago is easier, but you have an expectation in New York. Okay, New York means is has an expectation of winning titles, of exemplar play on the field. I mean, there's a lot of pressure there. And those two players at a very young age, one from California, that was Strawberry, and one from Tampa, Florida, that was Dwight Gooden, they performed like veterans as teenagers. And that is really something to have witnessed, because again, guys in their 20s, 30s that were seasoned veterans folded under the pressure. And those two guys absolutely shined under the pressure.
I remember watching that 30 for 30, and they were talking about Darryl Strawberry. He reminds me of Dennis Rodman. He literally was not picked high. He literally was a junior college guy, no expectations, and he completely crawled out of the situation that he was living in, where he was from. I can't remember where he was from, but I know that he had a single mom and didn't have a lot of good influences around him, and really kind of rose up and became this guy. On the other hand, from what I read of Dwight Gooden, very, very involved mother and father. Dad was kind of his coach, really strong bond, really strong family. And I think that was one of the reasons why Dwight Gooden, had such a career and was able to get out of the doldrums of the drug use, is because he had such a wonderful familial background and strong bonds with his parental unit.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned it with sort of the public persona that he has now. And isn't it refreshing to see a superstar out there and being humble about their downfalls? And don't you just want to root for somebody like that? I know I do.
Yeah. I think the redemption story is much more necessary than ever in our society with the way that Americans tend to kind of get into people's downfalls. I think we need to celebrate the resurrection, the phoenix and all of that. And one of the most emblematic ways that that's happened for me, I'm just going about my day and there's one picture of my son Miles with Dwight Gooden, and he has it on his wall, and it's kind of off to the side. And sometimes I'll just look at it, and I'll catch my eye, and I'll see it, and it just makes me smile to think that this guy is still around. He's still radiating so much joy. I mean, when we saw him on TV last year during the playoffs, Miles just looked up and said, "There's your hero." And I didn't add that into this. I really didn't want to tell my son about this to get him worked up, but he ended up going through the experience, took a few pictures, and I came out of that museum and I was teary eyed and it was hard for me to speak. And I just remember looking over at my son and I said, Miles, I just met my hero. And I didn't want you to get too excited, but I just want you to know that this guy was my guy that I followed. And he was my hero. And I said, what do you think about that? And he just looked up at me and he said, he's my hero now.
Yeah, I mean it's a wonderful way to transfer that to your son, and now you have that incredible bond not only with Dwight Gooden but also your son. So that's a wonderful way to tie that all in.
Yeah, and it's all because of Dwight Gooden and that spirit because he could have totally melted away into the sunset and no one would see him again, but he's been there and he's been very active and he just continues to get out there and just he keeps that revelry going, makes people happy. And like I said, when he was on that panel with Big Papi and Rodriguez, and I can't remember who else was up there, but Jeter was up there. Derek Jeter was like, you were my hero. I mean, the Yankee of all guys was like, when you were a Met, he was like, you were the guy. And it's like, there's just so many people out there that I think were fueled and their careers became what they were because they watched the talent of Dwight Gooden flower open and become what it was. And I think all of the good that he did absolutely overshadows any of the other things that happened. For me, even reading the book, all I remember was that he didn't make the parade after they won in '86, which was because he had had an all-nighter and it didn't happen. But even that is overshadowed. When I read stories and get into the lore of Dwight Gooden, all of the things that he's done as good is overshadowed any of the bad. And I can't imagine the baseball writers not having that level of empathy, looking at humanity and how many things that people do wrongly and consistently don't like try to seek forgiveness and get away with it. But this guy's actually sought forgiveness and he's moved on. I just think it's time for Doc to get the sunshine he's due.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's why I was so passionate about writing that article because I really do feel strongly that if again if you were to look through the National Baseball Hall of Fame, and if you were to research players and their backgrounds and and their misgivings, I mean, you would be hard pressed to find a single person in that Hall of Fame that is without fault.
Yeah.
And I know that Dwight Gooden had his faults, and we get all that. But again, I think the fact that he has a wonderful public persona, he seems like a really good guy. He seems like he is just embracing the fact that he made mistakes, but here's what I did to atone of them. And again, his statistics have not changed. They haven't been altered because of he was on steroids or he was doing this or doing that. His stats have remained the same. So there's no asterisk next to Dwight Gooden's stats. They're completely pure, 100%. So I say, let's get some information out to the people that need to change their minds, and if they need help with that, then let's help them change their minds.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah. And, I really feel, I wanted to get into sports broadcasting early on in my life. That was my ultimate dream. And I pivoted and it took me a while. It wasn't a world I wanted to get into as a journalist. I think being a fan was a better avenue for me, but I ended up getting into the jazz world, and jazz musicians are some of the best human beings on the planet. They're kind, they're humble, they uphold their art, that they uphold their artistry, and they just emanate this force of beauty. And I read these people that I interview, not only in jazz but otherwise, and the reason why I'm saying this is that I think I have a pretty good gauge of walking into an interview with personalities and knowing and feeling their warmth. And Doc Gooden embodied every good thing I could imagine from a human being when I met him and when I interviewed him. There was just that's the reason why I think I'm so gung ho about getting him to a place where he gets his due. I think he's earned it, and I think that it's only logical for somebody that has admired him, that comes from a journalistic background, that loves baseball, all of those things that would be a part of the writers that would judge this, and interject my voice in there to see, and your voice, to see if we can make a change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a worthy cause, and I'm looking forward to the next stages of it for sure.
Absolutely. Noel, I got to tell you, this has been an absolute joy to run into you, the beauty of our modern world. Thank you so much for being gracious, to opening up your wisdom, your time, and your love of Dwight Gooden with me. It's been rare. I don't know that I've ever ran into anybody in my lifetime that's really grabbed onto Dwight Gooden. So this has been, after 52 years, I found my kinship, a soul that's like-minded. So thank you for taking this time out.
Thank you for the opportunity, Joe. It was really great talking with you.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.